Yeah, so the problem of suffering for religious people is a big problem. Like, it's a problem. It's a theoretical problem, and it's also a personal problem for living a life of faith. The theoretical problem is, a very simple argument. If an omnipotent, morally perfect being exists, which it's a big part of the Christian faith, believing that God exists and he has that kind of nature. He's all powerful. He's the creator of this world. He created the conditions under which we live, under which sometimes terrible things happen, and he is morally perfect. Then why are these seemingly instances of seemingly gratuitous suffering everywhere, like every day in the news, constantly invading our own lives? Like, how do we just explain what God is up to? Or how do you justify even thinking that belief in a morally perfect, omnipotent being is rational given the way the world actually is? That's like the philosophical problem. And then the personal problem for people of faith, certainly for Christians, is, you believe that God is a person that cares about you, that loves everyone in the world. And you think, what kind of loving God would allow these things to happen to me if he could stop them? And that's itself is a kind of spiritual injury, trying to understand how that works. The same way if someone in your family willingly allowed something awful to happen to you and you become aware of the fact that they could have prevented it. Like, how would you reconcile your relationship with them? And you got to deal with both problems if you're a person of faith. And they're not easy, but also wrestling with these problems is a big part of just what it is to cultivate religious faith. On the theoretical question, there are kind of 4 strategies Christians use, and I prefer one over all of them, but they're all kind of viable. And some people mix and match. So if you're a philosopher, these are not ones where you have to necessarily pickle in. You can combine options. But one option that many religious people like is thinking that we just have such a limited perception about what's ultimately good in the world. Like, we have just very little evidence about how our world works or what kind of good things could be happening as a result of seemingly bad things that happen right now, the kind of causal relationship between instances of suffering right now and really wonderful things that might happen in the distant future. If you embrace that we have this kind of skepticism about our ability to perceive value, then you might think all of the really bad forms of suffering that I can't reconcile with the existence of a good God, the problem is with me. Like, I just don't understand what God could be trying to accomplish through that. And that's one approach. I don't really like that approach because I don't like a lot of forms of skepticism. But that's one approach that I know a lot of Christians think through. Another approach is to really lean on God's transcendence. And so you'll see some Christians say, look, God is nothing like anyone else in your life. God's morality, if he can even be said to have a moral code of his own, is completely unlike the moral code of creatures, because God invented morality and all of us in the world that we live in. Like, he's just so utterly different to us that the thought of asking a question that would indict his moral perfection just makes no sense. And so the problem of evil doesn't make sense for disproving his existence. And an issue, I also don't love that approach, though I know a lot of Christians who really like it. What I don't like about that approach is if you make God so different to us, then you face this challenge of trying to understand what it would mean to worship him or to have a relationship with him. And that's a very, very important part of the life of a Christian. Third big approach, which probably a lot of folks have heard about if you took a philosophy of religion class, is the so-called free will defense. The free will defense holds that one of the most important features of human life and human agency is that we were created with free will, like the freedom to choose to do good and the freedom to choose to cause suffering or to do evil in the world. And that God absolutely respects that free will that he's created us with, because it was part of him creating us in his image. So even though we do terrible things and there's needless suffering in the world, that suffering is caused by the misuse of human agency, and God, out of respect for us, is not willing to intervene to alter that. And I think there are some versions of the free will defense that are pretty interesting, but the free will defense famously struggles to capture lots of forms of suffering. They're just hard to trace back to individual people and their decisions. The fourth approach, and now we'll kind of land the plane, that I approve of, but it's the one that's hardest to get into a philosophy debate, is what I call the theological approach. So Christianity, Judaism, Islam, the three big Abrahamic religions that believe in a single, morally perfect, omnipotent God, they all talk a lot about suffering. Like, suffering is not a surprise to those traditions or their scriptures. In the Christian tradition, it inherits all of Jewish thought about suffering. The book of Job, which is basically a long meditation about why God would forsake someone. Ecclesiastes, which is like the most nihilist part of the Bible that just asks you to think about your life is so short and pointless and will be forgotten. What does it mean? Thanks be to God. And then obviously in the Christian tradition, very importantly, and this separates it from Jewish and Islamic traditions, God himself chose to live an embodied, incarnate human life with like all the physical pain that comes with being human, and to be the victim of state violence and to be the victim of hatred and the kinds of things that cause some of the most serious forms of suffering in our social lives. And so there's some aspect of God that deeply empathizes with the worst forms of suffering that we experience, but has also somehow redeemed them. One of the reasons why it's weird to talk about that in a philosophical debate is because usually in philosophy, you're trying to win over your opponent with your evidence. So you're trying to raise their confidence in your position. And if you're having a debate with somebody who's an atheist or a non-theist about the problem of evil, and you start going really deep into your scriptural tradition, they don't grant any of your premises. Like you're getting just like further and further out of things that they're familiar with or willing to accommodate you with. So you're not going to win that debate. Like if you're pulling that out in the argument, you're not going to move an opponent that already doesn't believe in the rationality of theism. And this gets into a question that I've wrestled with quite a bit as a philosopher, is like, what's the point of asking these questions? And I think you're not going to win the rational debate by bringing up like facts about Jesus, but you might help yourself quite a bit with the personal debate, which is thinking like, is my faith rational? Is my faith working for me? Is it a complete picture? Is it a way that I can live my life, a way that I can relate to God? And even if you're not trying to win debates with other philosophers, meditating in your tradition and really thinking about what your particular religion has to say about how God is working to deal with suffering can actually help quite a bit. And I think there's an important role maybe for philosophers to help people like learn to access those sources of philosophical consolation.